Variable equations, unit B and C, you'll also be asked to create a two-variable equation. Now, this can be a pretty simple equation. I'm trying to think which one it was in the homework today that I just had someone working on with their review. And it was as simple as like y equals 3/5 x. That was as simple as the equation could be. So it's just an equation with two variables and where I give you some information. To write and solve a system. So I can write a system of linear equations and I can solve. That's unit D. 4 questions, again, 3 points each, as we are kind of looking at those. So tonight when you're studying or going through, those are the type of questions in the review that you want to look at. This is from this last test. I can make a scatter plot, analyze the trend line, and make predictions. So when I was looking at your last test, this was on that second page, questions 5 through 8, and you actually had to use the graph to make your prediction. So that's day 1 of the final. Okay? Day 2 is going to continue, and we are going to be looking at the sequences. So I can write a sequence, both recursive and explicit, 2 questions, 6 points. I can identify and explain features of functions. That's unit B and C. When I'm talking about features of functions, I would say I'm looking at the slope and the y-intercept. So when I look at that question, I'm going to kind of be looking at, oh, what is the slope? Those are key features of linear. And the y-intercept. What does it tell me in this problem? So in the review, we've had some of those questions where it said, oh, someone is, like the pool is filling at a certain rate, and that would be the slope, the rate of change, right? The y-intercept was the starting point. What did it mean in that problem? I would also make sure that you know how to explain this in both a table, a graph, and the equation. What does slope and y-intercept look like in all 3 of those different things? Absolute value is the other one that we did. If you remember the absolute value functions, that's when we had the y equal. It looked kind of like point slope. Remember where we had the m out in front? And then we had our absolute value of x minus x1 plus y1. And remember, the x1, y1, this time was not a point on my line, but it was my vertex. And then if the m was a bigger number, it made it narrower. And if it was wider, like 1/4, m was. So you're going to be asked questions about, well, what do you know when you look at this absolute value graph of this equation? What do you know? Where is the vertex? How wide or narrow is it compared to the parent function? And then you're going to be asked, is it going up or down? So kind of going back and reviewing those in your notes as you were looking at those, that kind of information, okay? Also on day 2, we are going to be looking at, I can create and use 1 variable equations and inequalities to solve a problem. There's going to be 4 questions. 3 of them are going to have the 1 variable, and then you're going to have 1 inequality. So when I think about that one, there's going to be 1 that's an inequality. All the rest are going to be equations. Okay? So 3 out of those 4 are going to be equations, and then you're going to have 1 inequality. The next standard that we are looking at on day 2 is that I can represent and analyze using that two-way table. What I am going to be looking at there is that when I give you the two-way table, that you can compare. And what I am going to be, I'm going to give you 2 tables, and I might ask you to compare and contrast. So that's going to be one thing you're going to be asked to do. So you're going to be asked to compare and contrast 2 things. But the other thing that I think throws people off that you didn't have to do on the test is you have to do relative frequency. So when we talk about relative frequency is when you take, so like in the review homework, there was a 7th and 8th grade, and I can't remember what the 2 categories were. I want to say something like instant message and
Internet and TV.
Internet and TV. So we'll go internet, and then we'll say TV. And then you have this total column, okay? And if you were going to do relative frequency of the whole total, let's say we had 100, okay? I might then be looking at when my table was, like maybe this was 40, I don't know what it was, but let's go 20, 30, so we had 50 here, and maybe we have 40, 10, right? So I can see these were both 50. Down here I have 60, and this is 40. So I'd fill in those totals. When I'm doing relative frequency, if I was going to do the whole table, so if I was going to do out of the total, that's pretty easy if I give you these numbers out of 10, because I'd have my 7th and 8th grade, I'd have internet and TV, and 20 divided by 100 would be 20%, right? I'm just dividing everything by 100. I'm dividing all these numbers by 100. So those come out pretty nice on this one. If I asked you to do by the row, that means that when you look at your 2 categories of 7th and 8th grade, I'm going to divide the 20 by 50, and then I'm going to divide the 30 by 50 to get those numbers, right? That's getting relative frequency by the row. And if I asked you to find relative frequency by the column, then you would have divided by the 60 and the 40. So on the final, you're going to have to find relative frequency. There's one in your homework, and I think the one in the review, it's total. But if you're not sure, try a row and a column one, or look back at unit E and look at when we did relative frequency, and go back to one of those questions on the two-way table that's like in lesson E2 or E3, right at the beginning, and look at those ones to see if it can help you out. The last one that we are looking at for the final, there are 9 questions, so there's quite a few of them. Solving equations and inequalities, and then there's going to be one question where you justify, okay? The question where you justify, like in your review, I will not have you have to fill that in. So when you are looking in your review at questions like 94, 90 to 94, those questions, I will not ask you for the justify. That was number 90 to 94. I will not ask you to give me the steps. I will give you all the steps, and you will have to tell me the property. Like you'll have to say, oh, you got rid of the parentheses, that's distributive property. Oh, you added 4 to both sides, that's the addition property of equality. Oh, you divided both sides by 2, division property of equality. I will give you all the properties in a word bank. You just have to tell me which one you click, okay? You then want to show me finding the slope, and it's the change in y over the change in x, so that then you come up with the equation which came out to be something like 1.15. And then if you're using the first point, you would have said x minus 2001 plus 17.6. If it says predict 2009, that means you want to tell me x equals 2009, and you want to go to this equation, y equals right up here, and you want to put 1.15 times x, but instead of x, you're going to put in 2009 here, minus 2001 plus 17.6. And a lot of you on this last test, you did that part just fine. It was this next one when it said, well, predict when it's going to be $40. Well, the $40, that's when y equals 40. And so I had people come up and like guess numbers, and then they kept putting it in, and they, instead of using this equation, which was 1.15 x minus 2001 plus 17.6, and someone said, well, that's not the equation they had in the back. That's because they changed it to slope-intercept, right? Do you have to change it to slope-intercept? No. But in this equation, what I was looking for you doing is replacing this with 40. and using your distributive property and multiplying that and getting down here what is x equal. And someone said, well, this is a really weird big number when I multiply. Yes, it is, right? So as